Good morning, everyone. My name is Simon Hamilton. I'm the Chief Executive of Belfast Chamber, and you're very welcome to our event this morning, which is entitled Creating Spaces, Reimagining Public Realm. The coronavirus crisis has really shaken cities right across the world. Over just about a year ago, 12 months ago, cities saw students and tourists and shoppers and office workers almost abandon those cities overnight. Cities have responded in lots of different ways, but places like Paris and San Francisco and even Milan, which was the epicenter of the European outbreak, have responded by reimagining lots of public space to try to make their cities more livable, more walkable, and more attractive places for people to visit and to live in and also to work in. We at Belfast Chamber are obviously interested in what's happening closer to home here in our own city. And to help us to do that today, we're very pleased to be joined by Chris McCracken, Managing Director at Linen Quarter Business Improvement District. And we'll also hear later on from Pete Swift, who is the Managing Director at Planit IE, who are a company who have done work like this in right across the UK and indeed right across Europe. And Pete will join us later to tell us about some of their experience in places like Liverpool, Leeds, Manchester, and also the work that they've been doing here in Belfast as well. We're obviously very keen to get your views and your thoughts on what you see and also any questions that you might have for Chris and Pete. Please use the question and answer function, which is at the bottom of the screen. If you post questions there, we'll do our very, very best to get as many of those answered in the time available after Chris and Pete have both spoken. So please engage and ask questions and any queries that you might have. So we want to get straight into seeing some of this exciting stuff that the Linen Quarter bid is doing in Belfast. So Chris, it's over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Simon. Great to join you here. And just want to talk a little bit about what we're doing in the Linen Quarter at the minute. Just a little profile of the Linen Quarter to start with. We're the area south of City Hall, 25 hectares, and we cover some of the most famous landmarks in Belfast: Ulster Hall, Grand Opera House, BBC, the transport hub. We've got 300 small businesses, 87 larger businesses, including some national and international companies headquartered here. We've got a daytime work population probably between 15 to 20,000. How that will change post-pandemic, we'll still wait to see. Not very many residents, but there is an increasing student number. But we are the main connection to the Queen's Quarter. And you can see in the slide there that there's a lot of projects going on. In fact, there's around £1 billion of investment for this small area between 2015 and 2030. Some of that investment, such as hotels and offices, has already happened. A big chunk of that £1 billion is going to be the transport hub in Weaver's Cross, which is probably one of the most exciting developments in the whole of the city. And we've had presentations as part of the Belfast Chamber series on that already. So whenever we started in 2018, one of the first things we did was try and find a vision for the area. We started by looking at the history of the area. I think it's important to understand where you've come from before you can understand where you're going to. The interesting thing about looking at the history was there was three themes of the 19th century Linen Quarter. First, there was the connectivity. The Linen Quarter really happened because of the train station at Great Victoria Street. That's what brought people into the city, and industry and houses developed around that train station. The second was innovation. The linen industry itself was extremely innovative and became a world leader industry in the 19th century. And the third was culture and hospitality, including famous landmarks like the Crown Bar, many music halls, Grand Opera House, Ulster Hall, etc. And those three themes are still the defining elements of the Linen Quarter today. The connectivity with the £500 million investment in the train station in the Weaver's Cross, and the glider and various other transport connections, innovation, Ormabas Tech Hub, Kainos, etc., and culture and hospitality. We're actually the densest area for hotels in Northern Ireland, with around 150 million of investment in the last 3 years. So whenever we're looking at placemaking, there are a number of challenges for the city. There has been successful urban regeneration and investment in Belfast, but insufficient focus on urban renewal and quality of life. How people actually experience the city, maybe not enough thought has been given to. The public squares and social spaces have been neglected in really quite a shameful way. And unfortunately, we've normalised some of that. We really should be shocked when if we're walking through areas like Blackstaff Square and Shaftesbury Square that we've allowed them to get into that state. There's a lack of green space, there's congested traffic, there's a lack of cycling, walking and social space. And as more scientific research is going into air quality, and we realise the health harms that that is causing, we cannot go back to the way it was before. We have to find a new path for our city. We're also behind the curve in sustainable buildings, housing space standards, and inclusive mixed-use developments. And by that, I'm thinking of the way that we're pushing arts and culture, for example, out of the city centre. We have to find a way to accommodate different types of constituencies as we regenerate. There are those things that we can be positive about, and we should give ourselves credit for the way that we're looking much more at becoming a resilient, circular and resource efficient city. Our renewable energy journey is extremely positive. There's been some really exciting developments in sustainable transport and active travel, but it still has a way to go. And I think cycling infrastructure is really the biggest gap there. The impact of COVID on regeneration is still unclear, but that makes placemaking even more important. And I do believe that Belfast is rising to the challenge. And we are a compact city with strong partnerships focused on the same goals. And I think that's really important and can be a real advantage for Belfast. So the first thing we did was we wanted to create a welcome to the Linen Quarter. Belfast is known for the welcome that we give to our visitors. The historic entrance to the Linen Quarter is the Scottish Mutual building in Bedford Street. It had fallen into disrepair. It hasn't been occupied for a decade. A lot of graffiti and blight and rubbish growing up around it. So we stripped that back, put a lovely welcome vinyl on it, and we did some panels on the history of the area and signposting people to where they could go for a drink or bite to eat for lunch or stay in a hotel. The next thing we did was we've worked in a partnership with the City Council, Department of Communities and Department for Infrastructure under the City Revitalization Fund, which is a really positive initiative from the executive. And we looked at areas in the Linen Quarter that would benefit from some tactical regeneration for the public realm. We looked at 3 areas: Adelaide Street, Linen Hall Street, and Brunswick Street and Blackstaff Square. So Adelaide Street first, this is a development that the City Council are funding directly. And OJU and MAS, who did the Ormer Road parklet that has been so successful, are leading the regeneration initiative on Adelaide Street. And that's going to be wider pavements and outdoor artwork, benches and plantings. So we look forward to seeing the detailed proposals coming forward in the months ahead. Linen Hall Street. Linen Hall Street, as you can see from the left-hand picture, it's got a lovely aspect, one of the nicest views actually in the city, in my view, with City Hall and the tree-lined streets and the wide boulevard. However, there's not much there for the pedestrian. As you can see, very car-dominated landscape. Not really much to see and do. A few coffee places, but really very little there. So we want to make more of that aspect and of that street, which is at the heart of the Linen Quarter. We're doing 2 interventions there. One, outside the coffee bars, we're going to put a 30-metre boardwalk so you can have an outdoor coffee, similar to the Ormer Road parklet concept, with planting around it. We'll maybe put some flax there to symbolise the Linen Quarter. And then at the BBC, we're going to put a parklet and people can come here for an outdoor coffee. They can do some work on their laptops. We want to surround that area with some planting, almost try and create a feeling of having an urban park, and we'll extend that planting all the way around to the Thomas Thompson Fountain, which is another beautiful architectural gem in the city that's been neglected. We actually cleaned that up last year, did some stone cleaning, and the next phase is to do some renewed planting around that to make that a nicer space. The long-term aim for that is we'd love to connect that to the pavement and actually make that into a pocket park, which has been used successfully in interventions in other cities. So we also accompany this with a lot of day-to-day work in terms of keeping the street environment clean, putting in the plants, doing some repainting, cleaning up stonework. All of that is really important, and it's a real, I think, lesson from previous projects. Whenever you do an intervention, you have to look after it. And that's where the bid really comes into its own. We are the body that cares more deeply about the Linen Quarter than anyone else, and we will make sure that these assets get maintained. Now there's an example of Blackstaff Square, what I was saying earlier about the shameful neglect that we've allowed these public spaces to fall into. Our public spaces should be valued in a much greater degree than they have been. This is where the commons from the city come to meet. It's a place where we share experiences and share ideas. It should not have got into the state that it's been in. As you can see, there's really nothing there for anybody. Unfortunately, there's a lot of crime and antisocial behaviour that is growing around that neglect. So we want to put in a really exciting intervention. On Brunswick Street, we're working with the Department for Infrastructure to take ownership of that street, and we're going to deck that with 43 metres of decking. That decking is going to have a hospitality hub with around 160 outdoor seats. It's going to have an entertainment stage, and that will be in reference to the Ulster Hall and Grand Opera House. We could bring that sense of culture into the heart of the Linen Quarter, and it's going to have a games area at the back, so just an opportunity for outdoor socialising. And we'll animate this space with all sorts of activities. It's in the context of looking at tourism in the Linen Quarter, and there's a number of things we can do. The Grand Opera House is going to be opening with a new daytime attraction, a sort of a museum that people can experience the Opera House during the day for the first time. We'd like to work with the BBC to maybe open some sort of drop-in centre for people there, and working with all the hospitality venues around to really make it a positive experience for tourists. And there's an example of the area from another aspect. The Vantage building is just being developed at the minute. That will be a beautiful new office space. You can see the Grand Central behind it. The Maldron and the new students' accommodation is just off the screen. And the Crown Bar, of course, one of our most cherished assets and popular tourist destinations. Behind that, Blackstaff Square, we would like to reimagine that. This is an image of Sloane Square, but we'd like to put in some French bowls, tables and chairs, a place where people can socialise, enjoy life and relax. That is the future that we see for the area. Of course, I don't want to give a misleading impression. There's many areas that are challenging. This is Brunswick Street, just opposite James Street Restaurant. It's a regeneration site that will come forward at some point, but probably nothing going to happen there for the next 5 years. So what we're going to do is renew that hoarding and put in a really nice lighting projection to at least mitigate the backdrop. And whenever people come off from Hard Street, walk past that, the lighting projection will animate automatically, and that will draw them into the new hospitality hub at Brunswick Street and the renewed Blackstaff Square. So we think that will be a really interesting intervention, and we'll put some overhead lighting at various streets as well, just to brighten up the district. And as I mentioned, we'll animate it with music, we'll celebrate what we have. The food offer is fantastic in Belfast. We're going to bring in street ambassadors every summer to, again, enhance that tourist welcome. So these things need to go hand in hand, the capital investment and the animation and the cleansing and the promotion. So it's very much an ongoing effort. Then we've looked at what else we could do beyond some of those interventions on those streets. And we thought about the Golden Mile. The Golden Mile, as many of you will remember, was the go-to night spot for the city, and it's still resonates. It's still talked about today. It quite often appears in media articles. But what is it at the minute? Well, according to the Rough Guide to Belfast, its present state is a pretty depressing stretch of boarded up businesses and building sites. And again, there's an example of a public space that has been neglected, given over to car traffic, and really no place for people within that visual. So we thought, well, could we do something with the Golden Mile? We thought, well, the era of just a food and drink offer is probably past, but there's so much culture in that area. And we looked at the famous landmarks stretching from the Ulster Hall to the Ulster Museum, Botanic Garden, the Titanic Memorial Garden. There's a lot to do and see along the way. So we wanted to engage visitors to the city, both locals in Northern Ireland and people from overseas who come to Belfast. We wanted to engage them with the offer that's already there, build on what we have. So looking at film, culture, arts, live music, comedy, we put all that together in a package and thought, let's create a walking trail, taking us from Titanic Memorial Gardens at City Hall right the way through Botanic Gardens to the Ulster Museum. And there's all the things that you can see and do on the way. And we plan to launch that later this year with some collateral for tourists and some marketing and promotion. And if it's successful, we'd like to make that a long-term tourist product for South Belfast to reconnect Queen's Quarter with the city centre. It fits very well with sustainable tourism and the authenticity of the local offer, which are very important trends in tourism at the minute. What do people think of these interventions? Well, probably too small for you to see there, but basically the very left-hand bar is people love it. Whenever we ask people, about 95% of people supported the interventions that we are making. And you can see that even in some of the contentious issues, such as car parking spaces, really at the far right, there's very little opposition to that, as long as we are taking away car park spaces to do something positive with it. People don't want to see car park spaces just hoarded away for no reason. But if we're going to replace it with social hubs and planting and cycle lanes, then people are very supportive of it. And I think the pandemic has really created a shift in people's moods. People want a new type of city centre. And we asked what people thought the social and economic benefits would be. Again, people feel that this will increase footfall, it will increase spend, and that's consistent with a lot of research where you actually improve people's day-to-day experience of the city and improve cycling and walking experiences. Retail spend, hospitality spend actually goes up. So the next steps beyond this then, we've got plenty of other ideas that we'd like to introduce to the Linen Quarter. You can see there the Ulster Hall, one of the great assets of Belfast. We could do more, I think, to bring out those assets. There's an art gallery, for example, in the Ulster Hall that very few people visit. We could do some LED lighting on the front. Pocket Park, I've mentioned already, outside the BBC. Let's create that as a nice space where people can relax. There's very little green space in the city and we need to create more of it. In Shaftesbury Square, well, that image there is inspired by New York, some of the interventions they've done there. And Linen Quarter, of course, is on the American grid model. It's got streets like Hamilton Street and Franklin Street, which are named after Americans. So let's have that American connection and connect a little bit with some of the New York ideas. Future vision, long term, we think Shaftesbury Square could be much more than it is. We think it would be a great place for tech investments. It's got the talent of Queen's on its doorstep. It's got big companies like Kainos. It's got ecosystems like Ormo Baths. It will have the fast connection to Dublin. So we think, as the Economy Minister said, Belfast has a tech-led future. We think Shaftesbury Square would be a great landing place for that. We want to do more around the BBC, which will be another big development in the area, creating planting and green space, and cycling as well, connecting that proposed bridge across the Lagan with an actual cycleway that will take it all the way to Queen's University and to the transport hub. And finally, we've got the Sustainable District, which will be launching in November 2021. I'm afraid that's worthy of a presentation in its own right, so I'm not going to go into any more detail on that, just to say that we will be doing a lot around creating a more sustainable city, and that will be launched later in the year. So some of the key lessons that we've found from our experiences taking this forward: we need to change the narrative of the city over the last 60 years. It has been about deploying car-dominated roadways through the city. It needs to change that focus onto people and a greater empathy with the city ecosystem. We need to rebuild the vibrancy of our city centre. We need to rebalance that away from cars, make greater use of what we have. We need bodies like the BID to animate and enhance the public realm as well. greater focus on well-being. That will be one of the big trends following the pandemic. There has been a chronic underinvestment in cycling, walking and green space, and that needs to be reversed. We need to create homes for people as well. A lot of talk about bringing residential into the city centre, which is positive, but remember, we're building homes for people, not building units. And we need proper space standards and proper amenities like schools and surgeries and play parks. And then the existing policy and legislative framework also needs reform. We need light touch and planning to support tactical regeneration. And we need to bring the bodies together. There's too much fragmentation. We need to have a more cohesive approach and a single focus for the city centre going forward. So thanks very much for being able to share those, and hope that's been of interest.
Chris, thank you very much. I think that it's very exciting, and I think a lot of people watching will want to acknowledge the work that you and your team at Linen Quarter Bid have done to push all of those ideas forward, and with the aim of making our city centre even better. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and I think there's a lot of really exciting, a lot of exciting projects contained within that presentation. So thank you for that. I, having been really acquainted with William Shakespeare's work during homeschooling, obviously much more familiar with more of his famous quotes than what is the city but the people. I think that was a very, very, very good point to remember as we move forward out of this crisis. And obviously improving those spaces is entirely about people, and the city is nothing, as we have seen over the last 12 months, without people in it. I'm now going to ask Pete Swift, who's Managing Director at Planit IE. And Planit IE, for those who don't know, and people maybe say a little bit more, is a design practice with a passion for outside spaces. And Pete's going to share some of the work that Planit IE has done. They've been involved with the Linen Quarter Bid and a lot of its work, but also what they're doing in some of the cities in England where Pete and his team are based. So Pete, you're very, very welcome to this event. It's good to see you, and we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Well, yeah, nice to be back in a way, albeit kind of virtually, in a city that I've really fallen in love with over the last few years. I've been on a journey where the practice has moved outside of kind of UK landmass and out to Denmark and Scandinavia, but genuinely our work in Belfast has gone hand in hand with our work in Copenhagen. And I think a lot of lessons learned, a lot of lessons transferred, and a lot of lessons kind of met in the middle. So I'm going to talk kind of as quickly as I can. I've got 6 themes that I want to pick up on, which resonate with both Simon and Chris's words. One is about connective tissue. The other is about kind of modal change and the result in carbon reduction. The idea of retiring infrastructure. Key thing about public and private sector cooperation and collaboration. And then from that, opportunities for the private sector to embrace perhaps some wider social issues. And then again, as Chris has said, this new phrase we're all kind of getting to grips with, the idea of temporary urbanism. So this is my colleagues from Standard Practice who are working with Chris and the BID on the Brunswick Street social project. I think we're all united on this call and beyond on a kind of return to our cities. But I think even pre-pandemic, the narrative was starting to shift away from buildings to the fabric in between. And so Ben and Joe here are doing a piece of work as we kind of hot off the press. These images came to me yesterday, putting up a temporary kind of area for coffee and drinking in a public square called Sadler's Yard within Federated Hermes' redevelopment of the cooperative group's historic estate, now known as Noma. And again, I see a lot of parallels between here. This is right next to Victoria Station. So again, those Blackstaff Square parallels, and the idea of like welcoming people back to the city. I'm going to finish with something even more ephemeral, but I'm perhaps going to move on to those 3 northern powerhouse cities that we seem to place a lot of our project work within. This is a CGI of Buildings Liverpool's project. For those of you who don't know, 65 hectares of former historic dockland. A lot of it is within the World Heritage Site or the World Heritage Buffer Zone. Last week, Everton got approval for a new 54,000 seat stadium just in the foreground of this view. You can't quite see. If you like, this is probably the bird's eye view back from the stadium to the city. But what's been fascinating has been the progress during the pandemic months. Those two buildings at the end of this CGI are built, finished, and occupied, and they've been brought forward by a very colourful developer from Sydney, who made his money in Australia and married a Scouse girl, and so came back to Liverpool. But the next phase is this. The next phase is the delivery of Central Park, which will see 2.5 hectares of public space built alongside the existing canal, but also will incorporate what's been going on during the life of the last 12 months, which is the installation of a massive district heat network, which will be run by Peel and metered back to developers and partners, and also to public sector, in that we have a brand new ferry terminal. So this is another view across the park, again heavily centred in biodiversity increases in air quality, reduction in the amount of car provision, and then this is probably the newest news. So these are two more buildings, again brought forward by our favourite Australian, right next to a new ferry terminus for the Isle of Man, which will create a floating link back into the city centre, which at the moment doesn't exist. And that point about public and private. So the city council at the moment are very much looking at their connective tissue, putting their main road on a diet. This is the Strand, which separates, anybody who knows Liverpool, separates the waterfront from the city. The city is embarked upon, and I guess through the, if you like, the upside of not having many people and much traffic in the city, has been able to undertake a transformative piece of work along the length of the Three Graces, but from our benefit all the way, 200 trees, 4.5 kilometres, new cycling infrastructure, all the way to Liverpool Waters, and ultimately all the way up to the stadium. It's a pretty poor CGI that we picked off the council's website because it's not our project, but it's great to see some of these more kind of what I'd call Northern European approaches to infrastructure being adopted in a city that's not very far from you. So again, those hops are quite short. And then if we hop over the Pennines, you know, this has been a fascinating project to see come to life. So 4 years ago, the City of Leeds appointed Danish urbanist Jan Giel and his team to sit alongside Arup locally to produce a blueprint for what was called their South Bank strategy. So South Bank plan aims to double the size of the city population in the next 15 years. And at its heart is a new public park called Air Park. This is the site of the former Tetley Brewery. And it was bought by Bastin, the biggest property developer most of you know nothing about. They're the property investment arm of the IKEA parent company. And so their focus very much is on circular economy, on biodiversity, on public health, on health and well-being, on modularity, and modern methods of construction. But I think fundamentally on community and being a really important part of the city fabric. So this part will be developed, it's already on site and being developed before the buildings are brought forward. We've got a number of historic buildings within the tapestry of the plan, which will be bringing themselves forward. And our new office in Leeds actually sits in a co-working space from a converted pub in the middle of this site. So again, kind of idea of practice what you preach. And again, you know, a real green, verdant environment. It's been incredibly close to the city's Our Spaces strategy, but also fundamental linchpin of the city's declaration of a climate emergency. And so to hop back over the Pennines to my practice's home city, I guess a great example when Chris was talking about your Southern Gateway partnership and down out to Queen's University. This is or was the middle of Manchester University's campus. And this is a road, as you can see, called Brunswick Street. It links some very challenging and deprived communities on the edge of the city centre with the middle. It's very much a case of stay away as opposed to come on in. The wider corridor is a much bigger partnership, a wide-ranging collaboration between Bruntwood, a big locally based developer now, a nationwide business, and Manchester City Council, L&G Investments, both universities, and a significant amount of estate from our NHS trusts. Again, Brunswick Street was always kind of street that divided the campus, and now it unites. It is now a new park. It's Brunswick Park. It finishes in Sir Alfred Waterhouse's beautiful Victoria building that no one really got to look at. And it's very much about just uniting the communities as well as retiring the infrastructure. So, it's rammed on normal days. It's been a real oasis during the pandemic. It's allowed students and local residents to come together in a green space in a city that never existed. You had to push beyond here to Whitworth Park and other places where you probably felt you weren't in your neighbourhood anymore. So again, vital green strand and a true kind of build back better, and that brings me really to a project that we've been working on for the last 7 years, and again many parallels to the Linen Quarter. This is the site of our former BBC headquarters on Oxford Road, which moved to Media City in Salford about a decade ago. It was bought by Bruntwood with support from L&G and the City Council, and at the heart sits at Symphony Park. And I can safely say, as a landscape architect and an urban designer, this was definitely one of those things that you drew and never thought anybody would make. It's an incredible piece of new green infrastructure, but also huge entertainment venue, lots of new homes where no one ever lived. The building you can see in the background is now occupied. It's run and operated by Vita Student Living, and the residential building on the left of the view is soon to complete. And having been on site last week, it would appear Symphony exists. We are about 4 months off completion. But again, I think what's the takeaways of things to just kind of bring to you are that idea of the private sector, investing in city green and blue infrastructure. So this also reunites the people of Manchester with the River Medlock, which had been completely cut off for generations, but also improved water quality, improved biodiversity. And then again, back to your resonance with Blackstaff Square and others, this is a project called Hatch, which sits on the later phase of the Circle Square project. Was a scheme that we kind of scribbled 5 or 6 years ago. It's the most popular food and beverage destination in the city, and it also, more importantly, aside from maybe very recently, has managed to carry on trading through the life of the pandemic. So not only has it brought economic activity, but it's brought life to the street, and that life has then involved my colleagues again from standard practice coming in and building pop-up infrastructure that allows people to socially distance while also getting together in smaller, more controlled groups. And so again, a kind of pandemic salvation, really. And then we come to two final things, and I'll send you the web links rather than try and get into the websites themselves, because it's just too much technology to go in one go. United City is a private sector initiative where 60 private sector businesses in Manchester came together, fronted by Bruntwood and others, to help the business community re-engage with the city centre. So we will pay a subscription, I guess, like a kind of pop-up bid. But actually it's about lobbying, it's about research, it's about lesson sharing, it's about that idea of repopulating the city, and a real force for good, which has really helped the City Council drive their narrative about getting people back into the city centre. And then a project, I guess, that I'd like to finish on, really, which is this idea that we can all see some of those sort of members of society who've really, really struggled more than probably everybody on this call for definite, massive increases in rough sleeping and homelessness. This is a project being brought forward by two of our local developers, Peel Holdings and Capital and Centric. It's for an area below the railway arches owned by Peel, undevelopable for traditional development, if you like. But what it allows us to do, every member of the project team, so there are 30 of us, have all given our time pro bono across the life of the pandemic to build a new community, you know, in a very different sense, to allow those rough sleepers and long-term homeless people access to the job market, to training. So there's a village hall proposed within here, not just places to sleep and places to work, places to socialise. But I think a real great example for me of the private sector actually putting their money where their mouth is, getting involved in both the physical and the social fabric of the cities. And then just to finish off and skip very quickly, and I noted one of Chris's images, which is very relevant. We've been doing a piece of work for Salford Council. So anybody who knows Manchester, two cities who sit next door to each other, who until very recently have not acknowledged that the other one exists, but have now started to unite. And one of the biggest parts of the master plan for Salford has been a new neighbourhood called Greengate, which has popped up over the last 4 or 5 years. But at the heart of it was a square that was built 12 or 13 years ago, never had any neighbours and never had any purpose. And so we've been given the opportunity to, if you like, invite the people of Greengate back to the city and explore some temporary art installations, and we've called it the Hoist Gallery. We've got a successful application with the Arts Council, and we will be inviting everybody to unite around the idea of making flags, but not in a sort of divisory way, but in a piece of unity. You know, that idea of common endeavour and achievement, and so, you know, bringing the artists to work with the community and to create something that is just there because it's beautiful and because it's ephemeral. So you will be able to see these hoists and flag posts from hundreds of meters away at the end of a city centre road in Deansgate, which is having masses of activity, masses of things being taken out and replaced with cycle infrastructure. And so, you know, in itself, it will be an event. In itself, it will also use local craft businesses to help the community create and construct. But also, we get to bring the community slowly and safely back to the city centre, engage in workshops. My colleagues 5 or 6 years ago built an entire pub across 200 workshops with the community in the city centre. It was on the front cover of the EasyJet magazine. It's been in the New York Times. It's been all over the place. It's just about to be taken apart again and redeployed as 5 projects across the wider Noma estate. But yeah, that idea that, you know, we want everybody to reconnect and to think about what makes a city rich, and not just, as you say, food and beverage and tourism, but that idea of having a show, you know, having a show on the street. Again, there's parallels with Linen and the Linen Quarter and what Chris and his team have been doing. So again, we've got a programme of 12 months. And so, you know, we begin with kind of flying the flag first, and then it happens across the year. So that's me done. I think I'm on time. So I'll stop sharing my screen. I'm back to Simon. Thank you.
Pete, thank you very much. That was a really good tour of the Northern Powerhouse. Some really exciting projects there too. And it's good to see that Belfast is not alone in doing what it is doing, and that there are others who are similarly embracing the opportunity to reimagine outdoor space. Chris, I'm going to go from almost the sublime to the ridiculous and start off with a question about an issue that you and I have been engaged in with red barriers up and down various streets in the Linen Quarter area. I know it's something that you've been working very closely on, and we've been working very closely on. You've been working very hard on as well to try to get those removed. Could maybe outline what for a lot of people have been, I think, frustrated at the sight of them. I think we're all very keen that whenever work is done, that it's of a high quality standard. I don't think those red barriers would ever fit into that category. Can you maybe give folk a bit of an update as to what their status is and what's going to happen?
Well, we're keeping the red barriers for those areas only where we're going to be doing work. So those areas that I've touched on already, plus those areas that are going to be converted into cycle lanes. I'm pleased that the department are now going to remove the remaining red barriers. There's no point in having barriers up just to stop people parking. We should only have barriers if we're actually going to do something with it. So in the short term, those barriers will come back, and that does create a bit more access to the city centre. The long-term journey for that, though, is to remove car parking spaces from on-street space. I do think, and it might be slightly different with some people who are dialing in today, I do think the car has an important future and will remain central to every city in terms of going to and from. But I would see that would be mainly from going from, say, rural to the city. Once you get to the city centre, I don't think there's really a justification for car parking on the street. So I'd like to see more multi-storey car parks as a long-term solution. So that's what I think we'll try and work to. And then over time, release more of those on-street car park spaces for social uses, green space, cycleways, and making the city centre more around the people.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think that's good news around those barriers, which might sound a bit, people maybe wondering why we're getting into something so parochial, but it has been a source of some frustration for many of us. And I think that it's a good point around cars. It's not some might see this as aspects of what we've been talking about today as almost anti-car, and I think it's important, as you said, Chris, to acknowledge that for a lot of people that is their primary mode of transport. There are some people who, particularly those with disabilities, for whom accessing the city centre is best by car. So it's not about pushing cars out of the city centre completely. It's particular cars, or it's with the location of certainly in terms of a lot of the discussions are around the private car, but obviously there are other vehicles, taxis, buses, and so forth that are still very, very important to access. But Pete, is that something that in your work in different places that you've come up against some resistance? And how important is it that as we're delivering schemes like this and some of the stuff that you guys have been working on, that you do engage stakeholders in the way that Chris was showing with the survey that Linen Quarter carried out?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a kind of it's a ubiquitous challenge, I think. But I think what you said, Simon, is quite key. Is you've got to reframe the narrative around this isn't a car knocking project. This is a carbon reduction project, and it's a quality of life project. And rebalancing streets. When we look at historic photographs of people on streets and cars and carts and horses and all those modes of movement, and everybody's fine. Why have we created so much segregation that then treats everybody like an idiot? And I think that then goes back to the point about inclusive cities. A lot of our work is around working with disabled access groups, around groups that find certain, if you like, design approaches difficult to navigate. And so instead of kind of listening and then going and doing the same thing, is listen and change. We did a big piece of work in the middle of Preston, a much smaller city, where the entire project was based around a set of Braille plans that were worked up with a number of partially sighted groups and disabled access groups, Guide Dogs for the Blind, and it was a real salvation for the project. So like everything, I always think engagement builds better projects, and if you just do that linear kind of, this is the brief, here's the designers, they know best, there's the boards, tell us what you think, we might not change things, we might change things, this is what we've done, that doesn't work. What the pandemic's been able to do is force an acceleration of change in habit, whether that's going running more, spending more time with your kids when you're not trying to teach them badly, seeing the seasons move, or not getting in your car. We're not going back. Yeah, it's still going to be really hard. Yeah, we're going to have a fight with the bus companies about trying to get them out of Deansgate in Manchester. But actually what we've seen across, cities and villages, I mean, this isn't just a city scale. I've been working on a project for a very sort of well-to-do-ish village, but but it had a real problem with cars, a real problem with public safety and kids going to school. So those things are, the bus has left the station, you know, and we've got to get away from, you know, you've probably seen a lot of ire around the idea of low traffic neighborhoods. Yet we all have, you know, parents and grandparents who used to talk to us about playing on the street and walking up and down the road and kicking a footy, and it's kind of, where did that go? You know, and I think in a way that idea of community and life on the street is the real win. It's not about kick the car. It's about re-engender and really kind of refocus what a street is for, and remember that, and then bring that forward rather than. And I think Chris is right. I mean, our just to finish on our Air Park project, the original blueprint was underground parking under, you know, half of the plots, and for a whole host of reasons, not just economics, it's now going in 2 multi-stories, both of which are reversible plots. So in 15 years' time, if we are on hoverboards and riding bikes everywhere, one of those plots will become an office or a place to live or a hotel. And that idea, look, the sooner we get our heads around the fact parking is a meanwhile use, it's not a permanent land use, it doesn't have a class of its own, then we'll move forward.
Thanks, Pete. And Chris, in terms of the engagement that you had with businesses in the Linen Quarter bid area, I mean, did you find that, you know, the stakeholders were buying into this idea much more maybe than they had in the past?
Well, people always want to know what change means. So I think you have to, as Pete was saying, listen to what the individual concerns of various stakeholders are, and then make sure that the change that you're introducing addresses those concerns and in some cases enhances those concerns. So yeah, we've put a lot of effort. I don't think you can communicate enough, and we've tried to as far as possible in the restrictions, actually have one-to-one meetings with various businesses, particularly those in the doorstep of the interventions we're putting in place. We've advertised in the papers. We've engaged other groups such as City Council, Royal Ulster Architects Society, or the Chamber to help communicate messages. And we'd like to do more of those. We'd like, as Pete, we'd like to do more workshops, focus groups. You know, as we go forward with all of these interventions, we have to take people with us, and we have to allow these interventions to be shaped according to the issues that different constituencies have. But what we have found is, yes, that it has been extremely positive. People, you've seen in the slides, you can see where we're coming from. I hope we can create a vision of where we want to go to. And there's very few people that will argue with that vision or feel that's the wrong way to go. So people are positive about it. And I think we just need to continue that communication to make sure that we move together collectively as a city.
Thanks, Chris. There's definitely a lot of positive energy about the proposals and the questions that we're getting. We're going to try to answer as many of those in the next 10 minutes or so as we possibly can. Pete, you'll not be surprised to know that we've got a question from Esther Haller-Clark about weather and whether or not this type of outdoor space, very open outdoor space, I think you described as Northern European style, is really suited to Belfast. I don't know if you've been to Belfast often, how many times you've been here, but if you were, you would notice that it's not the most tropical of climates. So what bearing does the weather have on the success of, or otherwise, of outdoor space and reimagined public space?
Well, I mean, look, you can't ignore it, but in the same vein, you can't, you know, everybody talks about Manchester in the same vein. You know, it was in the rain shadow of the Peninsula, it's always raining. It isn't, you know. And look, when you look at Northern European cities, you know, from Copenhagen to Oslo to Bergen to further up, you know, if it's not lashing it down, it's freezing, and if it's not freezing, it's windy, and you know, there ain't a windier place than Liverpool, and so that whole idea of be cognizant of it, so be cognizant of the need for shelter, the need for cover, the need for actually the point of don't just plan for shelter and cover, because there are going to be days when the sun's out. And so what I think we've seen in the last 20 years in particular is a real adoption of the outside as being, you know, whether it's our own homes, whether it's how we use cities, whether it's how we use our places of work, it's an extension, and you roll with it to a greater or lesser extent. I mean, we've seen huge, you know, trends in places really kind of, rather than saying, well, it's cold, so we're not going to try, or it rains, so we're not going to try, is some of the places that are the best examples of external population are as wet as Belfast, or as wet as Manchester, or as windy as Liverpool, or as cold as Bergen. So, you know, I think part of it is about a kind of societal shift, in the same way as saying, look, we're not going to become like Holland tomorrow and everybody's going to get on bikes, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
Yeah, thank you. And does that then feed into, I mean, we have a question from Alan Lowry, who heads up a great local company called Environmental Street Furniture, who've been building street furniture, not just in Northern Ireland, but right around, and installing it right around the world. But about the quality, I mean, obviously, if we embrace our outdoor spaces more, but it's done in a very kind of temporary way, that will show up, and people may not use it as much. But does it need to be really good quality? And do you see this as, you mentioned the sort of very much more permanent and irreversible, and therefore quality has to be injected right from the start?
Yeah, I think there's a really lovely phrase coined by a developer called You and I, who've done some really great developments in London, are developing our Mayfield project in Manchester, and they talk about worthwhile uses rather than meanwhile uses. And I think it's that idea that we are now in an age where this fabric becomes part and parcel of the fabric of the city. So if you look at a project like Hatch, it might have a temporary planning consent, but it's going to be there for a decade. You know, we're going to enter, a bit like every architect has got a design for a terraced house. Every landscape architect's going to have a design for a parklet, aren't they? And some are really rigorous. Certainly, some of them, Bold Street, you know, they're there for the duration. And I think it says a lot about how you feel about your city. So you could make them out of a few pallets and not really be worried, or you could think perhaps more sustainably and more circular economy driven, and think, when it finishes its job as a temporary installation, what does it do next? And so I think you're right. There's a nervousness in many quarters about that feeling of temporary, just then becoming messy, then becoming dangerous, then becoming antisocial, and it's trying to arrest that. But I think Alan also asked a question about close to my heart. Shouldn't be really, should it? HVM, hostile vehicle mitigation. I would give you a great example of, I think, where you can use that. So we wanted to take all the traffic out of that. 600 million quid restoration of the town hall in Manchester, and we got real antagonism from taxi drivers, particularly from bus operators, and a lot of pushback. And yet it wants to be for the good of the commons. You know, this is the public space in the home of socialism. So what can we do? It was only when someone from MI6 came to talk to us about the need to know where the red dot is as a potential future target that the narrative changed, and we moved the traffic. And now the HVM components are part of the fabric of the design. So they don't look like hostile vehicle mitigation. You would not know they are there. A bit like at Canary Wharf and other places, a lot of stadia have started to adopt that. They can still be beautiful. And I think we all forget that the infrastructure should be as beautiful as buildings and parks.
Thank you. And Pete, sorry, Chris,
Simon,
yes, go ahead.
As well, just for the Belfast model, we've looked at parklets around the world, San Francisco, London, other countries. We've actually incorporated in our parklets a steel barrier within the frame of the parklet, so with crash protection. So as far as the public concerned, they'll see boarding, they'll see painting, they'll see planting, but within each parklet is actually this protection system as well. So safety is really important, quality is really important, maintenance is really important.
Thanks, Chris. Pete, in terms of outputs, obviously a lot of people looking at this will see that it's attractive. There are perhaps in some people's minds some compromises around some of this, but I suppose on the flip side is the benefits that it brings in terms of outcomes and outputs. And from your experience, what are those in terms of footfall or dwell time or spend? Have you seen much evidence to suggest that not only is it worthwhile doing because it's just a nicer use of space, but also brings benefits for neighbouring businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably look a bit higher up in the food chain than that, Simon. There's, arguably, if you want to distill it, there's three problems in the world, obesity, climate change, and traffic. So if you use them as your lens to doing all those things, what we've realized is that if you take it as a virtuous circle, and particularly the lens of climate adaptivity and carbon reduction, then you think, well, it looks better, tick. The quality of the place is better, tick. The economic output then is better. The quality of life is better. I talked to Chris a lot about, organizations like Monocle that run quality of life indices across the world. You just see how that will change post-pandemic when everybody starts to re-embrace those bits of city and urban fabric that really do, as a result, perhaps not as the original brief, drive economic activity, because they drive footfall, they drive patronage, they drive return visits, because they're beautiful, purposeful, greener, softer, all that kind of thing. But they also deal with, flooding events and surface water drainage and PM10 air quality and all that kind of stuff. So I think we are really now in an age of kind of reciprocity of all those things. You cannot do some over here and some over there. They've got to be the same thing.
Okay. Thanks, Pete. Gavin Rafferty at Ulster University has asked a good question around, I wouldn't sound negative, maybe, but maybe what are your views on some of the barriers around including well-being and quality of life outcomes into regeneration projects, and I know these are very small regeneration projects as adds up into a greater whole, but as particularly some of those examples that you were showing us in Manchester and Liverpool and Leeds, are there any barriers? Are there any issues that you've experienced, Pete, and similarly Chris at a Linen Quarter level, of any concerns that you have?
But I think if you are engaged in regeneration, more often than not, you cut your teeth in challenging communities and environments, and people who've been disenfranchised from investment and the uplift. And I think what we're seeing across those three cities that I've spoken about certainly is a massive drive to improve the life chances, whether that's based on gender, whether that's based on ethnicity, whether it's based on, the idea of a universally inclusive city. It's not just a nice to have to add in, it's a driver for many, many projects. Loads of research, for instance, on the fact most play areas are designed for boys. So what does that mean in terms of how girls and then women feel about cities and about them using those facilities? And I think that it's becoming far more, and I think it's a generational shift. I think it's coming from the bottom upwards. Probably saw in my region, we are a certified B Corp business, and so we are legally bound to place equal emphasis on people and planet as well as our profits. And I think what you're finding is a global change in the way business thinks, and as a result of that, you'll get a global change in how people see age, divisions, how they see gender inclusivity, as they see, the whole Black Lives Matter movement, and thinking, how would that ever play a place in public realm design and public space? But it's front and center, and actually trying to understand that link between the social and the physical is I think a real positive momentum. And when some cities have amazing disability access and inclusivity groups, some they're really marginalized, and I think the the win is to bring them all to being, you know, a primary voice and a real driver in all those conversations.
Thanks, Pete. And Chris, let me just final question to you, because I'm just conscious of everybody's time, not just both yourselves, but everybody listening. That a couple of questions, one from Robert Clark and one from Patrick Nelson, both very similar around, I think everybody's is very enthusiastic about what you're proposing, and not only want to see it happen in the Linen Quarter, but right across Belfast City Centre. And I see our colleagues at Belfast One also saying that they have similar plans for their bid area. Making it happen can be a challenge. There are a lot of moving parts, if I could describe it as that. You know, you've got the council, various government departments, yourselves as an organisation. Has that been a challenge? Bearing in mind, I sense it's the sort of thing that you could talk a lot about in terms of the scale of the challenge, but has it been difficult? Is that why perhaps we're seeing things happen in other cities maybe a little bit quicker than it's happening in Belfast? Has it been a challenge for you and the team?
I think there's a lot of positive talk and there is support for what we're trying to do, but the legislative and policy agenda has fallen behind where we need it to be. There were a number of reforms brought in England, Scotland, Wales a few years back about tactical regeneration, for example, that alleviated planning conditions. If you want to put a container, for example, in the public realm, you have to go through a full planning process. It's maybe not quite as onerous in England. If you want to make a change of use for a pop-up shop or a pop-up restaurant, you may run into lots of planning conditions around that. They've eased that in England, so I think we could make some simple planning changes. I think the biggest problem we've got though is we're fragmented. Every city in Great Britain the city council will control the roads, it will control the regeneration, it will control the planning. Here we've got 3 different agencies looking after those things. So there is an argument for consolidating those powers in the city council so that we can have a more cohesive view for city management. I think we should also go further. I'm personally a believer in regeneration agencies. Those agencies blend the commercial focus that perhaps the city council can't fully get behind or get under the skin of with the legal and statutory powers of the public agencies. And we've seen in examples across Europe that those regeneration agencies can really deliver massive change.
Thank you. I suspect that's a subject that we will touch on again and again as we continue through our regeneration journey, and particularly as we move hopefully into economic recovery. It's just easy to me then to say thank you both to you, Chris, and to Pete for giving up your time this morning to share not just what Chris and the team in Linen Quarter are doing, which I think has excited a lot of people who have seen it maybe for the first time today, but also to see those experiences in Leeds and Liverpool and in Manchester as well. I fear, Pete, that might be the closest that many of us get to a short city break for a day or two yet. But we really appreciate seeing what you guys are doing over there. It's really exciting and inspirational to us in Belfast as well. So thank you both to Chris and to Pete for your time and all the effort you put into those presentations. Can I also thank Neil Dalzell and the team at ND Events for making it today possible and run so smoothly. And can I thank everybody who has come along and attended today as well. We will share the slides and we will also share those links that Pete talked about. And there will be a playback of this available on YouTube very soon, which we'll also send out. And anybody who wants to share the slides or the playback with colleagues or friends, please feel free to do so. I just want to finally remind everybody that there are more Belfast Chamber online events coming up. Go to our website, belfastchamber.com. You'll see the next 2 are improving workplace wellbeing. We're partnering with Inspire Wellbeing, mental health charity, to run a webinar on that issue on the 19th of March. And then we are starting a new series of events entitled Re-Energizing Belfast. We're delivering those in partnership with Carson McDowell, a local law firm. They're starting on the 26th of March, and the first one is going to be focused on the future of work. And we've got some really exciting presentations, including looking inside Rapid7, the US cybersecurity firm in Belfast, at their absolutely outstanding new offices at Chichester House on Chichester Street. And it's well worth coming along to see that. So please go to the website, register for those. I look forward to seeing you hopefully on those events very, very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.